Okay, let's unpack this. Think about your morning. Maybe you just finished a cup, or perhaps you're holding one right now. Coffee. For so many of us, it's a non-negotiable ritual, right? A comfort, a kickstart.
It really is. It's truly ingrained in daily life for, well, millions of people.
Exactly. But what if that daily habit isn't just about waking up or, that moment of pleasure? What if it's doing something more, something maybe significant for your long-term health, especially as you get older? And specifically, what's the research saying about women?
That's a question recent research has really zeroed in on. We've gone pretty deep into a stack of sources for this dive, actually, including some findings from, well, a massive multi-decade study out of Harvard. It created a lot of buzz when it was presented recently. And we've also got insights from various health experts who weighed in.
Right. So our goal for this deep dive, basically to cut through the noise, pull out the absolute most important insights from these sources, and get you quickly informed on what they say about your coffee and how it might tie into, well, healthy aging.
Yep. Consider it your shortcut to understanding the core findings, the implications, straight from the source material.
Okay, let's jump right in then. Where do these sources take us first?
Well, the starting point for a lot of this recent conversation is a really significant long-term study. The sources highlight findings presented at the Nutrition 2025 conference. And the data came from the well-established Nurses' Health Study.
Okay, the Nurses' Health Study. And this wasn't just a quick snapshot, was it?
Oh, no.
The reports really emphasize the sheer scale tracking nearly 50,000 women over a period spanning, 3 decades?
That's right, 3 decades.
We're talking data collection from the mid-'80s all the way up to the mid-2010s.
Yeah.
That's a serious commitment to observation.
It really is. And what's crucial to understand is the definition they used, the definition of healthy aging in this specific study. It wasn't just about reaching a certain age.
Right. The sources make that really clear. It was a very high bar, wasn't it?
Extremely high.
To meet their criteria for healthy aging, a woman had to live to at least 70. And be free of 11 major chronic diseases.
Right.
And have no physical functional limitations.
Good.
And no mental health or cognitive impairments. And no memory complaints.
Wow. That's a really comprehensive picture of robust health well into later life.
It is. And the core finding reported from this particular analysis, regular consumption of caffeinated coffee during midlife was associated with, well, an increased probability of meeting this really rigorous definition of healthy aging decades later.
An increased chance.
Yeah, the sources mentioned something like each additional cup of coffee was linked to about a 2% to 5% higher chance of achieving this healthy aging status.
That's quite a link. Connecting coffee not just to lifespan, but specifically to living a lengthy life free from major health issues and functional decline, according to this study anyway.
That's what the findings suggest, yes, within the specific framework of this research.
Okay, but that brings up an immediate question for me. Is this about caffeine in general, or is there something specific about coffee itself? Good question. And this is where the sources add a really important layer. They strongly emphasize that the positive association with healthy aging seemed to be linked specifically to caffeinated regular coffee.
Caffeinated regular coffee. So what about other drinks? The ones people commonly have.
They looked at others. According to the sources, neither decaf coffee.
Okay.
Nor tea, whether it was caffeinated or decaf.
Really? Not even tea?
Nope. Neither showed the same positive association with their definition of healthy aging.
Huh. And there was one specific drink that seemed to have the opposite effect, right? I remember reading that.
Yes, definitely. The sources distinctly point out a negative association with cola consumption.
Cola? Like soda?
Exactly. Drinking cola was tied to a significantly decreased chance of healthy aging. The cited ranges were between, I think, 20% and 26% lower probability.
Wow, 20 to 26% lower. That's a substantial difference compared to the coffee findings.
It really is.
That stark contrast really makes you think, doesn't it? It suggests this isn't simply about getting a jolt of caffeine.
That's what the experts think, too.
So what do the experts cited in the sources think might be behind the coffee association, then?
They suggest it's likely the interplay between caffeine and a whole host of other beneficial compounds found naturally in coffee beans.
Okay, like what kind of compounds? Are they specific in the sources?
They are. They specifically mention polyphenols.
Polyphenols. We hear about those a lot. Antioxidants, right?
Exactly. Widely recognized for their antioxidant and anti-inflammatory properties.
Yeah.
The sources also name-check compounds like chlorogenic acid, diterpenes, and trigonelline. other active components in coffee.
Okay, chlorogenic acid, diterpenes, trigonelline. And these compounds, especially the polyphenols maybe, they've been linked in other research to various health benefits.
Yes. The sources briefly reference other studies suggesting these compounds might play a role in potentially mitigating the risk of certain cancers, for example, and perhaps helping protect against degenerative conditions like Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, chronic kidney disease, even liver diseases.
So that adds some context. It helps explain why coffee might have effects beyond just the caffeine hit.
Precisely.
This is really interesting stuff. But, with such a big finding like this, there have to be important caveats, right? What are the limitations? What points do the study authors and the experts really want us to keep in mind here?
Absolutely. And this is crucial context. First and foremost, the sources stress this was an observational study.
Observational.
Which means it can identify an association or a correlation.
But it can't prove cause and effect.
Exactly. Cannot definitively prove that coffee causes healthy aging. We're seeing a link, a connection, not direct causation.
Got it. Correlation, not causation. That's like rule number one for interpreting this stuff. What else did they highlight?
Well, the sources note the specific population studied, it was primarily white, educated female health professionals, nurses, basically.
Right.
Which means the results might not be directly applicable or, generalizable to all populations.
Yeah.
Different groups might respond differently.
Okay, so a specific group, not necessarily representative of everyone, makes sense. And how was the data actually collected? Was it reliable?
The information on coffee consumption relied on self-reporting.
Self-reporting.
Yeah, through food frequency questionnaires given periodically over the years. And as with any self-reported data, there's always potential for some level of error or, maybe recall bias. People don't always remember perfectly.
True. And habits change, right? Especially over 30 years. How did they account for that? Did people drink the same amount the whole time?
That's a good point. The sources indicate the analysis primarily focused on baseline consumption, sort of their intake in midlife, over the 30-year follow-up. It's not entirely clear from the sources we looked at exactly how changes in habits throughout those 3 decades might have fully factored into this specific healthy aging analysis.
Okay. And what about how people actually drink their coffee? Black, sugar, cream, fancy syrup, specific brewing methods. Did that factor in?
Well, the sources mention that the nurses' health study cohort overall does have detailed data on diet and lifestyle, things like sugar and creamer use, which have been used in other published papers from the study.
Right.
But it wasn't fully detailed in the sources we reviewed how the specific preparation method or the use of additives might have been accounted for in this particular Healthy Aging Association finding. That detail wasn't there.
Okay, so maybe a bit of a question mark there. And these findings presented at the conference, are they like the final published word?
No, not yet. The sources explicitly state these findings are preliminary. And as of when these articles were written, they hadn't yet undergone the full process of peer review and publication in a scientific journal.
Gotcha. So exciting, potentially important, but still early findings? Preliminary.
Exactly. Needs more scrutiny.
Okay. And beyond the study's own limitations, the health experts interviewed in the sources, they also added warnings about the risks of drinking too much coffee, didn't they?
Oh, yes, they definitely did. They referenced the generally accepted guideline for moderate consumption, often cited as up to 400 milligrams of caffeine per day for most healthy adults.
400 milligrams, which is roughly
equivalent to about 4 standard 8-ounce cups of brewed coffee. Give or take, depending on the brew strength.
Okay, 4 8-ounce cups as a sort of upper limit, and going over that can lead to...
Well, the signs of overconsumption listed in the sources include things like elevated heart rate, heart palpitations, potentially increased blood pressure, anxiety, headaches, the jitters, and worse.
Right, and one source cited a cardiologist who warned about blood pressure specifically.
Yes, that cardiologist made the point that persistently high blood pressure over time, whatever the cause, is a known risk factor for really serious long-term health issues. Things like heart failure, heart attack, stroke, kidney disease, and even cognitive decline.
So moderation is definitely presented as key here. It's not an if some is good, more is better situation.
Not at all. And one nutritionist mentioned in the sources suggested that maybe 1 to 2 cups a day might be a safer or perhaps more common recommendation for her clients, just to be cautious.
1 to 2 cups. Okay.
It just underscores that while there might be benefits at moderate levels, There are also clear risks at high levels. And importantly, individual tolerance varies a lot.
Right, individual tolerance. And speaking of how individuals handle it, the sources also brought up some really fascinating nuances about when you drink coffee and how your own body processes it, didn't they?
They did. Yeah, one source highlighted findings from another study, actually. That study suggested drinking coffee primarily in the morning was linked to a lower risk of early death related to cardiovascular disease compared to spacing coffee consumption throughout the day.
Just in the morning. That's a really specific timing detail. Do the sources offer any ideas why that might be the case?
Well, they speculate a bit based on other research. It could be related to our body's circadian rhythms, our internal clock. Also, the importance of sleep quality for heart health. Maybe late-day coffee messes with sleep too much. And possibly that coffee's compounds might help counteract inflammation, which naturally tends to peak in the morning hours.
Interesting theories. Okay, so maybe morning coffee is better. And there was also a practical tip from a nutritionist about drinking coffee with food, not on an empty stomach.
Right. The suggestion was basically to avoid drinking coffee on a completely empty stomach if you can. The rationale offered was that doing so might potentially contribute to a sharper spike in cortisol.
Cortisol, the stress hormone.
Exactly. So having something small to eat alongside your coffee, maybe some toast or fruit, might help regulate how your body responds, smooth things out a bit.
Okay, so timing matters. Having a little food helps. What about what you actually put in your coffee? That came up quite a bit.
Oh yeah, that's a big one the experts really emphasized. Black coffee itself is, almost calorie-free, and that's where those beneficial compounds are concentrated.
Right.
But adding lots of sugar or artificial sweeteners or those flavored creamers, those can introduce components that actually contribute to inflammation and potentially counteract some of coffee's benefits or even increase risk for chronic diseases down the line.
So basically, skip the super sweetened, fancy coffee shop drinks if health is your main goal.
That seems to be the suggestion, yeah. The sources suggested sticking closer to black coffee, or maybe adding something like cinnamon. One source mentioned cinnamon adds flavor and might have its own potential blood sugar benefits, according to some research.
Cinnamon instead of sugar. Okay, that's a practical swap. And it sounds like even with moderate black coffee, the effects can still be really different for different people. It's not uniform.
Absolutely not. And this brings us to the whole concept of individual variation, which the sources touched upon. It's pretty fascinating. Our ability to metabolize caffeine can vary significantly based on our genetics, for one thing, and even hormonal factors like estrogen levels in women, which can influence how quickly your body actually clears caffeine.
Genetics. Was there a specific gene mentioned in relation to this caffeine metabolism?
Yes, they mentioned the CYP1A2 gene. CYP1A2.
Okay.
The study authors specifically noted that individuals with a certain variation in this gene tend to metabolize caffeine much more slowly. They're slow metabolizers.
Slow metabolizers. And for them...
Well, for these slow metabolizers, high caffeine intake might not offer the same potential benefits seen in the study. And it could actually make them more susceptible to adverse effects, like those heart palpitations or anxiety you talked about.
Wow. That really highlights how personalized nutrition might be the future, doesn't it? Like knowing your genes can tell you how much coffee is right for you.
It certainly points strongly in that direction, where advice isn't just one size fits all, but actually tailored to your unique genetic makeup and physiology.
Super interesting. But until we get that level of personalization easily available, the experts had a pretty clear recommendation, didn't they, for anyone with health issues?
Yes, a very clear and important one.
Yeah.
They strongly advise that anyone with underlying chronic health conditions, or anyone who is taking medications regularly, should definitely talk to their doctor about their coffee and overall caffeine intake.
Why specifically?
Because there can be potential interactions or specific risks depending on your individual health status and the meds you're on. Better safe than sorry.
Okay, good advice. So let's try and wrap all this up. We've got the exciting, though preliminary findings from the Harvard study, the nuances about caffeinated coffee versus other drinks, how you drink it, when you drink it, the risks of overdoing it, and this really interesting personalized angle with genetics. Where do the experts cited in these sources ultimately land on coffee's role in the grand scheme of healthy aging?
Well, their consensus seems quite clear and pretty grounded, actually. While moderate coffee consumption may be associated with some benefits, potentially contributing to healthy aging as seen in this specific study, it is absolutely not presented as some kind of magic bullet. Or a substitute for fundamental healthy living.
Right. That makes a lot of sense. You can't just pour coffee over an unhealthy lifestyle and expect miracles, basically.
That's essentially the core message they really want people to take away. There was one phrase that captured it well, something like, you can't drink coffee to combat a terrible lifestyle.
Yeah, I like that. Straightforward. So, according to these experts, what are the most powerful and proven things we should focus on first for healthy aging? The big levers.
They consistently reiterated the cornerstone habits, the things we probably already know but need reminding of. Consistently eating nutrient-dense meals, that's number one. Engaging in regular physical activity. Getting movement in. Prioritizing sufficient and quality sleep. So important. And avoiding smoking. A huge factor.
The big four. Diet, exercise, sleep, no smoking. And coffee's potential benefits based on these sources should be viewed as something that might potentially support or complement those foundational habits.
Exactly.
Rather than replacing any of them.
Precisely. It's presented as maybe an interesting piece of the puzzle, something extra perhaps, but definitely not the whole solution. And they also mentioned, for those who prefer not to drink coffee, maybe they don't like it or doesn't agree with them, similar beneficial bioactive compounds, like those polyphenols, are also found in things like tea and dark chocolate.
So other options.
Yeah, suggesting you might get some related advantages from those sources as well.
That's good to know. And there was even a brief mention about the economics of coffee, wasn't there? A potential confounder.
Yes, just briefly. One expert raised the point that the cost of coffee, particularly, frequent visits to fancy coffee shops, could potentially be correlated with socioeconomic factors. People with more disposable income might have other healthy habits too, which just adds another layer of complexity to interpreting these large population studies.
Right. Always more factors to consider.
Okay,
so I think we've taken a pretty comprehensive look at these sources now, covering the promising links identified in the Harvard study, the specific type of coffee involved, those beneficial compounds, but also the vital limitations of the research, the risks of overdoing it, the practical nuances of timing and additives, and that fascinating aspect of individual responses and genetics.
Yeah, I think the key takeaways from these sources are really that intriguing potential association between moderate caffeinated coffee in midlife and that very strict definition of healthy aging later, especially for women. The clear distinction from other beverages, particularly cola, the likely role of its unique compounds, not just caffeine, but also, crucially, understanding the study's limitations correlation isn't causation, the specific group studied, and acknowledging those individual variations and the risks of too much. And maybe the biggest message, coffee's potential benefits are best realized when it's integrated into an already healthy lifestyle, not used to compensate for an unhealthy one.
Right. So we aim to give you a clear, actionable understanding of what these specific sources are telling us without you needing to dig through all the articles yourself.
Hopefully we did that. And it kind of leaves us with that final thought, doesn't it? Given this whole discussion around genetics like that CYP1A2 gene and hormones and highly variable individual metabolism, how much more truly personal will our understanding and advice about diet and drinks like coffee become in the future?
Definitely something to ponder. Maybe over your next cup, however you choose to take it.